The music pulsed through the heavy doors of the Crystal Gardens event hall, a steady rhythm of celebration that seemed to mock the silence where Mama Zainab sat. She perched on the edge of a concrete planter outside the main entrance, her small handbag clutched in both hands, her best wrapper, faded but clean, spread neatly over her knees. Inside, laughter erupted in waves. Glasses clinked. Voices rose in toasts she could not hear clearly but could imagine perfectly. A security guard stood 15 feet away, pretending to watch the parking lot but stealing glances at her every few seconds. His discomfort was visible in the way he shifted his weight, in how he suddenly found his phone intensely interesting whenever their eyes threatened to meet. Mama Zainab did not cry. She had learned long ago that tears changed nothing. But her hands trembled slightly as she gripped the worn leather of her bag, and anyone watching closely might have seen her lips moving in silent prayer or perhaps in conversation with herself, the kind a person has when trying to make sense of something that defies all sense. How does the woman who paid for a wedding end up locked outside it? The question hung in the humid evening air, unanswered, unbearable. Before this story continues, have you ever seen someone disrespected simply because they looked poor? Have you watched someone judge a person's worth by their clothing, their accent, the calluses on their hands? Comment yes or no, because what happened to Mama Zainab happens every single day, in ways both large and small. The story did not begin that evening, of course. Stories like this never do. They grow slowly, fed by small decisions and silences, nourished by pride and fear until they bear fruit that tastes of ash. 23 years earlier, Mama Zainab had been someone else entirely. Not in essence, perhaps, but in circumstance. She had been a young wife, married to Ibrahim, a driver for a construction company. They lived in a 2-room apartment in Mushin, and though they had little, what they had felt like enough. Ibrahim worked long hours but came home smiling. They ate together. They planned together. And when Sadiq was born, Ibrahim held him like he was holding the entire future in his palms. Then came the accident. A truck with failing brakes on the Lagos-Ibadan expressway. Ibrahim had been driving the company vehicle, and his employer paid for the funeral but offered nothing more. No pension. No compensation. Just condolences that evaporated as soon as the burial was complete. Mama Zainab was 27 years old with a 2-year-old son and no income. Her parents had passed years before. Ibrahim's family blamed her for not producing more children, for being unlucky, for being a burden they did not want. She learned quickly that widowhood in her community meant becoming invisible to some and visible in the wrong ways to others. So she did what women like her have always done. She survived. She borrowed money from a rotating savings group and bought a large pot, a gas cylinder, and ingredients. She began cooking jollof rice and fried plantains and chicken stew, selling plates from a spot she rented on the side of a Jeej motor road. The work was relentless. She woke at 4 in the morning to begin cooking. She stood in the heat and the rain. She smiled at customers even when her feet ached and her back screamed. She saved every spare naira. Sadiq grew up at that roadside stall. He did his homework on an upturned crate while his mother stirred pots. He learned to count by helping her calculate change. Customers would pat his head and tell Mama Zainab she was raising a fine boy, and she would smile and say nothing, but inside she carried a fierce determination that this boy would not grow up to struggle the way she had struggled. She paid his school fees without fail, even when it meant eating Gary for 3 days straight. She bought his textbooks new when other parents bought used copies. When he gained admission to study accounting at Lagos State University, she sold her gold wedding band and told him it was no sacrifice at all, that she had been meaning to sell it anyway. Sadiq was a quiet boy who became a quieter man. He studied hard. He graduated with good grades. He found work at a mid-sized accounting firm in Victoria Island. Mama Zainab watched him put on a tie each morning and felt something in her chest expand and settle simultaneously. This was what she had worked for. This was the crown she had earned through sweat and silence. When Sadiq told her he had met someone, Mama Zainab felt joy first, then caution. The caution came not from anything Sadiq said but from what he did not say. He mentioned Lillian's name carefully, the way a person mentions something fragile or potentially explosive. He said Lillian worked in a bank. He said her family lived in Lekki. He said she was beautiful and smart and ambitious. What he did not say, but what Mama Zainab understood immediately when she met Lillian for the first time, was that Lillian came from a world that looked at people like Mama Zainab and saw only what was lacking. That first meeting happened at Sadiq's small apartment in Agba. Mama Zainab had brought food, as she always did, because that was her love language, the only one she trusted completely. She arrived early and was setting out the containers when Lillian walked in. Lillian wore a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than Mama Zainab earned in a month. Her makeup was perfect. Her hair was styled in loose curls that fell just so. Mama Zainab stood and smiled and greeted her the way elders greet potential daughters-in-law, with warmth and hope and a slight bow of respect. "Good afternoon, my daughter. I am so happy to finally meet you. Thank you for making my son smile." Lillian's response was a brief nod, a murmured greeting that barely qualified as acknowledgement. Her eyes swept over Mama Zainab once, taking in the simple Ankara blouse, the flat shoes, the hands that showed decades of hard labor. Then she turned to Sadiq and asked if they could eat outside because she had made reservations. The food Mama Zainab had brought sat untouched in its containers. Sadiq avoided his mother's eyes as he grabbed his keys. They left, and Mama Zainab stood alone in that small apartment, understanding perfectly well that she had just been measured and found wanting. But she said nothing. Mothers like Mama Zainab are skilled in the art of swallowing words. She told herself that Lillian was young, that she would warm up with time, that love could bridge any gap. She wanted Sadiq to be happy. She had spent 23 years working for his happiness. She would not ruin it now with complaints or concerns. As the relationship progressed, Mama Zainab tried. She invited Lillian to church. She offered to teach her how to make Sadiq's favorite meals. She asked about Lillian's work, her family, her dreams. Lillian responded to these overtures with polite distance, the kind that makes it clear that closeness will not be permitted. She never visited Mama Zainab's home. She never ate the food Mama Zainab prepared. She called her Ma instead of Mama, and even that syllable felt cold. When Sadiq announced their engagement, Mama Zainab hugged him and felt happiness and dread in equal measure. She met Lillian's parents once, at a family introduction ceremony that felt more like a business negotiation than a celebration. Lillian's father was a retired bank director. Her mother spoke about their family home, their social connections, their expectations. They looked at Sadiq with approval. He was educated, employed, presentable. They looked at Mama Zainab like she was something to be overlooked, a minor embarrassment to be managed. The wedding planning began, and with it came demands that made Mama Zainab's stomach clench. Lillian wanted the Crystal Gardens, one of the most expensive venues in Lagos. She wanted a live band, a 5-tier cake, elaborate decorations, matching aso-ebi for the bridal party in lace that cost 30,000 naira per yard. She spoke about the wedding like it was a performance, a statement, proof of status and taste. Sadiq came to his mother's house one evening looking like he had not slept in days. He sat at her small table and put his head in his hands. The wedding costs were overwhelming. His savings were not enough. He had tried to reason with Lillian, to suggest something smaller, more manageable. She had responded with tears and accusations, saying he did not love her enough, that he was embarrassed of her, that if he truly cared he would find a way. Mama Zainab listened to her son's despair and felt a familiar determination settle in her bones. She asked him for the numbers. When he told her, she felt the air leave her lungs, but she kept her face calm. She told him not to worry, that God would make a way, that he should focus on his work and trust that things would sort themselves out. What she did not tell him was what she planned to do. Mama Zainab owned one thing of value. Years ago, before Ibrahim died, they had bought a small plot of land in Ikorodu with a dream of someday building a house there. After Ibrahim's death, Mama Zainab had held on to that land through every financial crisis. She had refused offers to sell it. It was her insurance, her emergency fund, the one thing that stood between her and complete destitution. She contacted a property agent and sold the land in 3 days. The buyer, a developer, paid cash. Mama Zainab held the envelope of money and felt like she was holding her own bones. She withdrew every naira from her savings account. She counted it 3 times on her bed, organizing the bills into stacks. Then she went to the event planner Lillian had hired and paid the entire balance for the venue, the decoration, the catering, everything. The event planner, a brisk woman named Mrs. Adele Eek, looked at the cash with surprise. She asked if Mama Zainab wanted to be listed as a sponsor, wanted her name announced, wanted any recognition. Mama Zainab said no. She said the payment was from the groom's family and should be recorded that way. She took the receipts and put them in an envelope and tucked the envelope into her handbag. She told no one. Not Sadiq. Not her pastor. Not her neighbors. She went back to her roadside stall and continued cooking and selling as if nothing had changed, except now she lived with the knowledge that she had nothing left, no safety net, no backup plan. Everything she had was now invested in her son's happiness. Would you sacrifice everything you own for your child's happiness and keep it a secret? Would you empty your savings, sell your only security, and say nothing? Type a mother would if you understand this kind of love, or a shouldn't if you think this was a mistake, because what Mama Zainab did next determines everything. The wedding day arrived with clear skies and humid air that promised rain later. Mama Zainab woke at 4 in the morning, as she always did, but instead of going to her stall she sat on her bed and looked at the outfit she had laid out the night before. It was her best, a blue wrapper and blouse that she had worn to Sadiq's university graduation. She had washed and ironed it carefully. It was not new. It was not expensive. But it was clean and modest and the best she had. She bathed and dressed slowly, her movements careful. She tied her headscarf the way her own mother had taught her, elegant and proper. She looked at herself in the small mirror on her wall and saw an old woman looking back. When had she become old? The question startled her. She was only 51, but her face showed decades of sun and stress. Her hands were rough. Her posture carried the weight of too many burdens. She pushed the thought away and finished getting ready. She arrived at Crystal Gardens early, before most of the guests. The venue was transformed, draped in white and gold fabric, decorated with flowers that probably cost more than most people earned in a month. She stood at the entrance and felt pride and pain compete for space in her chest. Her sacrifice had created this beauty. Her suffering had paid for this elegance. She had no assigned seat. Lillian's family had handled the seating arrangements, and Mama Zainab had not been consulted. She assumed she would sit with Sadiq's side of the family, perhaps near the back, somewhere quiet where she could watch her son marry without being a distraction. The security guard at the entrance checked her small purse without question and waved her through. She walked into the main hall and felt immediately out of place. Everyone else wore expensive Asoebi or designer outfits. The women glittered with gold jewelry. The men wore agbadas made from the finest materials. Conversations floated around her in English and Yoruba, discussions of business deals and social connections, laughter that came from people who had never worried about where their next meal would come from. Mama Zainab found a seat near the back, in a corner where she thought she might be invisible. She sat with her handbag in her lap and watched the hall fill with people she did not know. No one greeted her. No one asked her name. She was a shadow among the light. Then Lillian arrived for photos before the ceremony, accompanied by her mother and her bridesmaids, a procession of women in matching purple lace. They swept through the hall checking decorations, examining details, making small adjustments. Lillian looked stunning in her white gown, her makeup flawless, her hair styled in an elaborate updo. She looked like every bride dreams of looking, like someone stepping into a fairy tale. Her eyes swept across the hall, cataloging guests, noting who had arrived, marking status and importance. And then her gaze landed on Mama Zainab sitting quietly in the back corner. Lillian stopped walking. Her mother noticed and followed her gaze. One of the bridesmaids asked what was wrong. Lillian did not answer immediately. She stared at Mama Zainab, her expression shifting from confusion to something else, something harder. She began walking toward the back of the hall, her bridal train trailing behind her, her bridesmaids following uncertainly. The conversations around them quieted. People turned to watch. Mama Zainab saw her coming and felt her stomach drop, felt a cold understanding that something terrible was about to happen. Lillian stopped 3 feet away from where Mama Zainab sat. She looked down at the older woman with an expression that held no warmth, no recognition of their connection, nothing but cold assessment and clear displeasure. "Who let you in here?" Lillian's voice was not loud, but it carried in the sudden quiet. Several heads turned fully now, interested, curious about the drama unfolding. Mama Zainab stood slowly. She tried to smile. "My daughter, I am Sadiq's mother. I came for the wedding." Lillian's eyes narrowed. Her mother had approached now, standing beside her daughter with the same expression of disapproval. One of the bridesmaids whispered something that sounded like security. "This is a private event," Lillian said, her voice gaining volume. Her tone shifted, became the tone of someone addressing an intruder, a problem to be solved. "We cannot have people just walking in off the street. This is not a public gathering." The words hit Mama Zainab like physical blows. She tried to respond, tried to explain that she was not some stranger, that she was family, that she belonged here. But Lillian cut her off. "Look at you," Lillian continued, and now her voice was loud enough that half the hall could hear. "You are dressed like someone begging for alms. This is a high society wedding. We have standards. We have a reputation. Do you understand what you are doing? You are embarrassing us. You are embarrassing Sadiq." Mama Zainab felt the room tilt. She heard gasps, heard someone laugh nervously, heard phones being pulled from purses and pockets. She looked past Lillian and saw Sadiq standing near the entrance to the hall. He had just arrived. He was in his wedding suit, his groomsmen around him. He had seen the confrontation. His eyes met his mother's across the distance. And he said nothing. Lillian turned to the security guard who had followed them over. "Please escort this woman out. Make sure she does not come back in. We cannot have disruptions today." The security guard looked uncomfortable, looked at Mama Zainab with something like pity, but he stepped forward. His voice was apologetic when he spoke. "Madam, please, let us go outside." Mama Zainab looked at her son one more time. She willed him to speak, to intervene, to claim her as his mother, to defend her. But Sadiq stood frozen, his face a mask of shock and shame and paralyzing indecision. His best man touched his arm, said something Mama Zainab could not hear. Sadiq did not move. "If this was your son, if your own child stood by and watched you be humiliated publicly, would you ever forgive him? Comment forgive if you believe in second chances, or never if some betrayals are too deep, because what happens next will test everything Mama Zainab believes about motherhood and love." Mama Zainab walked. She did not cry. She did not shout. She let the security guard lead her out through the crowd that parted like water, past guests who stared and whispered, past the elaborately decorated entrance, into the parking lot where the setting sun painted everything gold. The security guard looked miserable. "Madam, I am sorry. I am just doing my job." Mama Zainab nodded. She understood. Jobs must be protected. She of all people understood that. She found the concrete planter and sat down, her best clothes suddenly feeling like costume, like a joke she had not understood she was wearing. Inside, the music started again. The wedding ceremony proceeded. Mama Zainab could hear it all, muffled but persistent. She heard the MC announce the entrance of the bridal party. She heard applause. She heard music swell for the bride's entrance. She heard the pastor begin the ceremony, his voice booming over the sound system. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." She sat outside while her son got married. She sat outside while the vows were exchanged, while rings were placed, while the pastor pronounced them husband and wife. She sat outside while guests cheered and cameras flashed and the couple kissed and walked back down the aisle as Mr. and Mrs. Adeyemi. The security guard offered her water once. She declined. A cleaning woman walked past and looked at her curiously but said nothing. The sun continued its descent, and shadows lengthened across the parking lot. Mama Zainab opened her handbag and looked at the envelope of receipts she had kept. She pulled them out slowly and studied them. Crystal Gardens Event Hall. Full payment received. Catering services. Full payment received. Decoration and floral arrangements. Full payment received. Each receipt was stamped and signed. Each one proved what she had done, what she had sacrificed. She had sold everything she owned to pay for a wedding she was not allowed to attend. The thought should have made her angry. It should have filled her with rage, with a desire for revenge, for vindication. But Mama Zainab felt only a deep, aching sadness. She thought about the life she had lived, the choices she had made, the years she had spent believing that sacrifice would be rewarded, that love would be recognized, that a mother's devotion would shield her from this kind of humiliation. She had been wrong. That was the hardest truth. She had been wrong about what protection her love could offer, wrong about what her son would do when tested, wrong about whether goodness and sacrifice guaranteed anything at all. Inside, the reception had begun. She could hear the MC hyping up the crowd, hear music thumping, hear cheers as the couple made their entrance. She imagined the high table where bride and groom sat, where Lillian's parents sat, where there was probably an empty chair meant for the groom's mother. Or perhaps there was no empty chair. Perhaps they had simply decided she did not exist. Mrs. Adele Eek, the event planner, arrived 90 minutes into the reception. She was late because she had been managing another event that afternoon and had promised to check on this one before the end. She was a thorough woman who took pride in her work, who liked to see her events running smoothly, who believed in making sure every detail was perfect. She entered through the main entrance and immediately began scanning the hall with a professional eye. Decorations, perfect. Catering, running smoothly. Music, appropriate. Guest satisfaction, high. She nodded to herself, satisfied, and began making her way toward the high table to greet the couple and confirm that everything met their expectations. She was stopped by one of the caterers who had a question about whether to begin serving the special menu or wait. Mrs. Adele Eek checked her watch, gave instructions, and then resumed her path toward the high table. She noticed people still trickling in, late arrivals being seated by ushers. And then she noticed something that made her stop completely. She had been at this business for 15 years. She knew how family weddings worked. She knew who sat where and why. And she knew, without question, that the woman who had paid for this entire event should be seated at the high table or at least in a position of honor. Mrs. Adele Eek scanned the high table. She saw Lillian and Sadiq in the center. She saw Lillian's parents on one side. She saw what appeared to be Lillian's grandmother on the other. She did not see Mama Zainab anywhere. She flagged down one of the ushers, a young man in a burgundy suit. "Where is the groom's mother?" The usher looked confused. "I am not sure, Ma. I do not think I have seen her." Mrs. Adele Eek felt a prickle of concern. She made her way to the high table and caught Sadiq's attention during a lull in the festivities. She smiled professionally. "Congratulations again. Everything is running smoothly. I wanted to confirm that your mother is comfortable with her seating arrangement." Sadiq's face went blank. Then it went pale. He looked at Lillian, then back at Mrs. Adele Eek. "My mother?" "Yes, Mama Zainab," Mrs. Adele Eek said, her professional smile beginning to falter. "The woman who made all the payments for this event. I wanted to make sure she was satisfied with everything." The noise of the reception continued around them, but at the high table, a profound silence had fallen. Lillian's mother leaned forward. "What payments?" Mrs. Adele Eek looked between them, confusion growing. The full payment for the venue, the catering, the decorations. Mama Zainab paid everything in cash 2 weeks ago. She made it very clear that the payment should be recorded as being from the groom's family, but she was the one who... She stopped talking because Sadiq had stood up so abruptly that his chair fell backward. His face had gone from pale to ashen. He looked like someone who had just realized they were standing at the edge of a cliff. The reception continued around them, guests eating and talking and dancing, unaware of the drama unfolding at the high table. "Where is she?" Sadiq's voice came out hoarse. "Where is my mother?" "I do not know," Mrs. Adele Eek said, now genuinely alarmed. "I assumed she would be here, seated with family." Lillian grabbed Sadiq's arm. "What is she talking about? Your mother did not pay for this wedding. You paid for it. You told me you had gotten a loan, that you had." Sadiq pulled his arm away from her. His eyes swept across the hall, desperate, searching. He began walking, then running, toward the back of the venue where he had last seen his mother hours earlier. Guests noticed now, heads turning, conversations stopping mid-sentence. The MC tried to keep the energy up, but the mood was shifting, people sensing that something was wrong. Sadiq reached the back corner where he had seen his mother being confronted. The seat was empty. He grabbed an usher, the same young man Mrs. Adele Eek had questioned. "Did you see an older woman, wearing blue, sitting here earlier?" The usher nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. But the bride asked security to remove her. She said the woman was not supposed to be here." The words hit Sadiq like a physical force. He stood still for a moment, his breathing shallow, his mind trying to process the full horror of what had happened. Then he turned and walked toward the exit, moving through the crowd like a man in a nightmare, pushing past guests who tried to congratulate him, ignoring the MC calling his name. He burst through the main entrance into the parking lot and saw her immediately. His mother sat on the concrete planter exactly where the security guard had led her hours ago. She sat with perfect posture, her handbag in her lap, her face turned toward the venue as if she had been listening to the entire reception from outside. The sight of her broke something in Sadiq. He walked toward her, his legs feeling weak, his throat closing. When he spoke, his voice came out as barely more than a whisper. "Mama." Mama Zainab looked at her son. She looked at him in his expensive wedding suit, his boutonniere still fresh, his face twisted in an expression she had never seen before, something between anguish and shame and realization that came too late. She did not stand. She sat and looked at him and waited. "You paid for everything," Sadiq said. "It was not a question. Mrs. Adelik just told me. You paid for the entire wedding." Mama Zainab nodded slowly. "And Lillian threw you out. And his voice broke. And I stood there and watched and said nothing. Is silence during injustice the same as betrayal? If your son stood frozen while you were humiliated, would that silence be as painful as the humiliation itself? Comment yes if you believe silence equals betrayal, or no if you think fear deserves understanding, because what Sadiq does next will determine whether this family can ever be whole again. The security guard had moved away, giving them space, but other people were beginning to emerge from the venue. The reception had essentially stopped. Guests were coming outside, drawn by the drama, by the whispers that had spread through the hall like wildfire. The groom's mother paid for everything. The bride threw her out. She has been sitting outside for 3 hours. Lillian appeared at the entrance, her mother beside her, both of them looking furious and frightened. "Sadiq, what are you doing? Come back inside. This is our wedding day. Stop making a scene." Sadiq did not turn around. He kept his eyes on his mother. "Why did you do it?" Mama Zainab reached into her handbag and pulled out the envelope of receipts. She handed it to her son. "Because you are my son. Because I wanted you to be happy. Because I believed that your happiness was worth any sacrifice I could make." Sadiq took the envelope with shaking hands. He opened it and looked at the receipts, saw the amounts, saw his mother's name, saw the dates showing that she had paid for everything weeks ago while he had been lying to Lillian, telling her he had secured a loan, pretending he had resources he did not have. "The land," he said, understanding flooding through him. "Your land in Ikoradu. Your savings. Everything." "Everything," Mama Zainab confirmed. Her voice was steady, but her eyes held an ocean of pain. "I paid so you would not be disgraced, so you could marry the woman you love with dignity, so you could start your marriage without the burden of debt. But today, when your wife humiliated me, when she called me a beggar and ordered me removed like trash, you chose silence. You chose to protect yourself instead of protecting the woman who has protected you every single day of your life." Sadiq dropped to his knees on the pavement in front of his mother. He did not care that his expensive suit was getting dirty. He did not care that dozens of guests were now watching. He did not care that his bride was calling his name with increasing desperation. He knelt before his mother and wept. "I am sorry," he said, the words coming out in gasps. "I am sorry, Mama. I was afraid. I was shocked. I did not know what to do. I failed you. I failed you completely." Mama Zainab looked down at her son. She thought about the night he was born, about the first time Ibrahim had placed him in her arms, about all the years of raising him alone, about every meal she had skipped so he could eat, about every night she had worked late so he could have school supplies, about every dream she had deferred so his could flourish. She thought about the fact that she had known, deep in her heart, that Lillian did not respect her, did not value her, saw her as an embarrassment. She had known, and she had said nothing because she had wanted her son to be happy. She had believed that love meant accepting disrespect in silence. She had been wrong about that too. "Sadiq," she said quietly, "fear is not an excuse. Shock is not an excuse. You are a grown man. You made vows today promising to protect and honor your wife. But before those vows, you made an unspoken promise to me when I sacrificed everything to raise you, when I gave up my own life so you could have a better one. Today you broke that promise." Sadiq looked up at her, tears streaming down his face. "How do I fix this? Tell me how to fix this." "You cannot fix it," Mama Zainab said. "What happened cannot be undone. What you did cannot be erased. But you can choose what you do next. You can choose whether you will continue to be a man who allows his mother to be disrespected, or whether you will become a man who stands up for what is right even when it is difficult. Lillian had approached now, her voice sharp with anger and embarrassment. Sadiq, enough of this drama. People are watching. Get up. Come back inside. Sadiq stood slowly. He looked at his wife, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time seeing not just her beauty and polish but the hardness underneath, the cruelty that had been there all along but that he had chosen not to see. You threw my mother out of our wedding, he said. She was embarrassing us, Lillian snapped. Look at her. Look at how she is dressed. Look at her shoes. Do you know who was at this wedding? My father's business associates. My mother's social club. People with status. And you wanted me to let her sit there like the woman who paid for everything? Sadiq's voice was rising now. Like the woman who sold her land and emptied her savings so we could have this expensive venue and this expensive food and these expensive decorations that you insisted we needed? Like the woman who sacrificed everything so I would not be embarrassed in front of your status-obsessed family? The crowd of guests had grown larger. Some looked shocked. Others looked guilty, perhaps thinking about their own parents, their own families, their own moments of choosing appearances over substance. Lillian's mother tried to intervene, tried to pull Lillian back inside, but Lillian shook her off. I did not ask her to do that, Lillian said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. If she chose to spend her money, that was her choice. She did not choose, Sadiq said. He turned to face the crowd of guests. She did not choose. She sacrificed. And there is a difference. My mother has spent my entire life sacrificing for me. She raised me alone after my father died. She worked every single day at a roadside food stall so I could go to school. She never complained. She never asked for anything in return. And today, on what should have been a celebration of our family joining together, my wife treated her like garbage, and I was too much of a coward to stop it. The silence in the parking lot was absolute. Even Lillian seemed unable to speak. Sadiq turned back to his mother. He held up the envelope of receipts. I cannot undo what happened today. But I can make a choice about what happens next. He turned to face the assembled guests. This wedding is over. Not because it was not beautiful. Not because the food was not good. But because it was built on my mother's sacrifice and my dishonesty and my wife's cruelty. And I will not continue to celebrate something that caused so much pain. Lillian made a sound of protest. Sadiq, you cannot be serious. You cannot end our wedding reception because my mother, who paid for everything, was forced to sit outside while we celebrated inside? Yes, I can. Yes, I am. He looked at Mama Zainab, and his voice dropped, became intimate, became the voice of a child speaking to his mother. Come home with me. Let me take you home. Let me. Mama Zainab shook her head. She stood slowly, her joints stiff from sitting for so long. No, she said. You have made your statement. You have said what needed to be said. But I will not come with you. I will go home to my own house, the house I have lived in for 20 years, the house I will continue to live in. Mama, please. You are married now, Mama Zainab continued. You have a wife. You have responsibilities. What you do with those responsibilities is your choice. But I will not be the reason your marriage fails on its first day. You must work out with your wife what kind of people you want to be, what kind of family you want to build. And when you have figured that out, when you have become the man I raised you to be, then we will talk. She picked up her handbag and began walking toward the main road where she would catch a bus home. Sadiq moved to follow her, but she held up her hand. No. Let me go. Would you walk away from your son on his wedding day even after he apologized? Would you demand more than words before offering forgiveness? Comment I would walk away if you believe actions must follow apologies, or I would forgive him if you believe a mother's love requires immediate forgiveness, because the hardest part of love is sometimes knowing when to step back and let the pain teach the lesson it needs to teach. Mama Zainab walked through the gathering darkness alone. She did not cry during the bus ride home. She did not cry when she unlocked her door and stepped into her small house and saw everything exactly as she had left it that morning when she had dressed in her best clothes with hope in her heart. She sat on her bed and removed her shoes and headscarf. She changed into her house clothes. She went through the motions of preparing for sleep, even though she knew sleep would not come. She lay in the darkness and stared at the ceiling and thought about sacrifice and dignity and whether there was any correlation between the two. She thought about whether a mother's love required self-erasure, required accepting disrespect, required suffering in silence. She thought about whether she had taught her son the wrong lessons by modeling endless sacrifice without ever demanding respect in return. The questions had no easy answers. 3 days passed. Sadiq came to her house every day. She did not turn him away, but she did not welcome him with the warmth she had shown before. She let him sit in her small living room while she prepared food or folded clothes or did the other small tasks that filled her days. He tried to talk to her, tried to explain, tried to apologize more fully. She listened but did not absolve him. On the 4th day, he came with documents. He spread them on her small table and explained each one carefully. He had contacted the property agent who had bought her land. The man had not yet developed it. Sadiq had used his savings and taken a loan to buy the land back. The title deed was in her name again. He had also set up a monthly transfer to her account. It was not a fortune, but it was enough that she would not have to work every single day, enough that she could have some ease, some comfort. And he had done one more thing. He had sat down with Lillian and her parents and made clear that moving forward, there would be boundaries. His mother would be respected. His mother would be included in family events. His mother would never again be treated as less than the honored elder she was. If those terms were not acceptable, then the marriage itself was not acceptable. Lillian had cried. Her parents had protested. But Sadiq had held firm, perhaps for the first time in his relationship with her. And slowly, painfully, they had agreed. Mama Zainab looked at the documents spread before her. She looked at her son's face, at the dark circles under his eyes, at the weight he seemed to have lost in just a few days. She thought about forgiveness, about whether it could be given freely or whether it had to be earned through changed behavior. "You did wrong," she said finally. "You failed me when I needed you most. That failure will always be there, a scar we both carry." Sadiq nodded, his throat working. "But you have also done something that many people never do. You acknowledged your failure. You took responsibility. And you are taking action to make sure it never happens again. That matters. Not more than the original failure, but it matters." She reached across the table and took her son's hand. "I forgive you," she said. "Not because forgiveness is easy. Not because the pain is gone. But because you are my son, and because I see that you are trying to become better than you were." Sadiq's shoulders shook. He held his mother's hand and cried the way he had not cried since he was a child. "But," Mama Zainab continued, "forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. You will need to earn back my full trust. You will need to prove through your actions, day after day, that you meant what you said. And Lillian will need to do the same." "I understand," Sadiq said. "We will. I promise we will." 2 weeks later, Lillian came to Mama Zainab's house alone. She came in the evening, after work, still in her bank uniform. She stood at the door and asked permission to enter, and something in her voice suggested that this visit cost her something, that pride was being swallowed with difficulty. Mama Zainab let her in and offered her water, and they sat across from each other in the small living room. Lillian spoke without preamble. "I treated you terribly. I was raised to value appearances and status above everything else, and I looked at you and saw only what you lacked instead of seeing what you had given. I cannot take back what I did, but I want you to know that I am ashamed. I am working to become better." The words sounded rehearsed, but beneath them, Mama Zainab heard something genuine. She heard a young woman confronting her own cruelty, perhaps for the first time. "Why did you value appearances so much?" Mama Zainab asked. Lillian looked down at her hands. "Because I was taught that how things look is more important than what they are. Because I grew up afraid of being looked down on, so I learned to look down on others first. Because," her voice broke slightly, "because I never learned to see the difference between worth and wealth." They talked for an hour. It was not warm. It was not comfortable. But it was honest, and honesty was a start. In the months that followed, things changed slowly. Lillian began visiting Mama Zainab regularly, learning to cook her husband's favorite foods, learning the stories of Sadiq's childhood, learning what it meant to be part of a family that valued substance over show. Sadiq kept his promises. The land remained in his mother's name. The monthly payments continued. And when Mama Zainab mentioned casually that her food stall needed repairs, Sadiq appeared the next weekend with tools and materials and spent the day fixing everything that was broken. The wedding was never spoken of in celebratory terms. It became instead a marker, a before and after, the day when a family almost broke and then decided to heal instead. 2 years later, when Lillian gave birth to a daughter, they named her Zainab. The baby was placed in Mama Zainab's arms in the hospital room, and the older woman looked down at the tiny face and felt something complex and bittersweet. This child would grow up in comfort. This child would never know the kind of struggle Mama Zainab had known. But hopefully, this child would also learn what her parents had learned through pain, that respect and gratitude and humility matter more than any amount of money or status. Mama Zainab still worked at her food stall most days, though she no longer worked from dawn until dark. She had help now, a young woman she had trained who managed things when Mama Zainab wanted to rest. She still wore simple clothes. She still lived in her small house. But she lived there with dignity, and when her son came to visit, he greeted her properly and publicly and made sure everyone knew that this was his mother, the woman who had raised him, the woman who had sacrificed everything, the woman who deserved honor above all others. On Sunday afternoons, the family gathered at Mama Zainab's house. Lillian, who had once refused to eat Mama Zainab's cooking, now asked for recipes and cooking lessons. Sadiq, who had once stood silent while his mother was humiliated, now stood whenever she entered a room and did not sit until she was comfortable. They were not a perfect family. The scar from that wedding day remained, a reminder of what had been broken and what had been required to begin fixing it. But they were a family that had learned something essential, that love without respect is empty, that sacrifice without acknowledgement is unsustainable, and that silence in the face of injustice is its own form of cruelty. Mama Zainab never again sacrificed in silence. When she gave freely, but she also spoke her truth. When she saw disrespect, she named it. And when her son or daughter-in-law faltered, she corrected them with the authority of someone who had earned her voice through decades of quiet suffering and who refused to be quiet anymore. The story could have ended with revenge. It could have ended with Mama Zainab refusing to forgive, with Sadiq's marriage crumbling, with bitterness poisoning every relationship. But it ended instead with something harder won and more valuable: accountability, changed behavior, and the slow rebuilding of trust. Because in the end, the wedding itself had been meaningless. The flowers had wilted. The food had been eaten. The music had stopped. What remained was the question of what kind of people they would choose to be, what kind of family they would choose to build, whether they would value appearance or substance, whether they would protect their pride or protect each other. They chose each other. Not perfectly. Not immediately. But eventually, painfully, persistently, they chose each other. Years later, when young Zainab was old enough to ask questions, she would sit with her grandmother and ask about her name, ask why she shared it with this strong, quiet woman who everyone treated with such obvious respect. And Mama Zainab would tell her the truth. She would tell her about sacrifice and humiliation and silence and accountability. She would tell her that respect must be demanded, that love must include honesty, that forgiveness is possible but must be accompanied by change. She would tell her granddaughter that money paid for a wedding, but respect saved a family. If this story touched you, if you've seen a mother sacrifice everything and receive nothing but disrespect in return, if you've ever stood silent when you should have spoken, don't just read and move on. Comment "Respect Mothers" so more people see this message. Share this story with someone who needs to understand that a mother's love should never be taken for granted. Let this be a reminder that gratitude is not optional, that accountability is not negotiable, and that the people who sacrifice the most for us deserve our loudest defense, our deepest respect, and our constant acknowledgement. Say it now: respect mothers.